It was late June 2001, and the New Jersey Nets had just concluded another subpar season. Posting a 26-56 regular season record, the Nets would finish the 2001 season 12th in the Eastern Conference and 15 games out of the 8th and final playoff spot. The Nets, having last made the playoffs in 1998, were searching for solutions to their problems. Their prayers were answered during the 2001 offseason when then GM Rod Thorn orchestrated a series of moves that would alter the trajectory of the Nets franchise, once viewed as the laughingstock of the NBA. Welcome back to the channel, guys. The man from Jersey here. In today's episode, we'll be taking a trip down memory lane and shining a light on one of my personal favorite teams of all time, the 2001-2002 New Jersey Nets. But before we get into the video, guys, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the post notification bell because you don't want to miss an episode from what is soon to become your favorite YouTube channel. With that being said, let's get into the video. The 2000-2001 season was another forgettable season for the New Jersey Nets. The team would finish 30 games under 500 and would lose key contributors for large chunks of the season. Veteran Kendall Gill was limited to 31 games played, while Keith Van Horn would only suit up for 49 of the team's 82 games. To make matters worse, Kerry Kittles, the Nets starting shooting guard, would miss the entire season with a knee injury, while number 1 overall pick Kenyon Martin would underperform in his rookie season, averaging 12 points and 7.4 rebounds per game. Perhaps the lone bright spot of the Nets' 2001 season was Stephon Marbury's selection to represent the Nets in the 2001 NBA All-Star Game. Marbury, the team's leading scorer, would average 23.9 points and 7.6 assists per game. Marbury's best performance of the season would come on February 13, 2001, when he would go off for 50 points in an overtime loss to the eventual champion Los Angeles Lakers. Marbury would hit big shot after big shot, matching Kobe Bryant point for point. However, the Nets could not close the game out and would fall to the Lakers 113-110 in only one of their 56 total losses that season. During the summer of 2001, GM Rod Thorn would look to bolster the Nets roster. He would begin by orchestrating a draft night trade which included the 7th overall pick Eddie Griffin. The Nets would ship Griffin to Houston for the Rockets' 3 first-round selections. These players would become Arizona forward Richard Jefferson, Stanford big Jason Collins, and Pepperdine's Brandon Armstrong. While it was odd for a team to trade out of a top 10 spot, especially for players drafted significantly lower, Nets GM Rod Thorn would orchestrate the move as a means to improve the Nets' overall lack of bench depth. But perhaps the greatest trade in Nets history would occur only a few days later, when Thorn would trade the high-scoring electric point guard Stephon Marbury to the Phoenix Suns for the pass-first defensive-minded floor general Jason Kidd. Thorn's last offseason move would come a month later when free agent center Todd McCullough would agree to a 6-year, $33 million deal. The Nets would also see the return of Kerry Kittles to the roster after missing the entire season before, and suddenly, the Nets had rounded out their roster and looked to return to the postseason with their improved roster and young core of Kerry Kittles, Keith Van Horn, and Kenyon Martin, all a year older and a year wiser. However, critics were not sold on the Nets' offseason moves. In fact, when Kidd would predict a 42-win Nets season, critics were left feeling skeptical. The Nets would get off to a hot start to the season, going 7-1 through their first 8 games, and suddenly, the Nets were showing early signs of what was to come. Taking an unselfish defensive-minded approach to the season, the Nets found themselves 21 games over 500 after a 94-93 win over the Charlotte Hornets on February 24, 2002. A pleasant surprise to the Nets offense this season was the team's ability to get out on the break, whether off a make, miss, or turnover. The Nets love to run the break. The Nets' fast break was led by Kidd, with athletic wing players Kerry Kittles, Richard Jefferson, and Kenyon Martin being the recipient of Kidd's pinpoint passes. Throughout the season, Kidd and Martin would also form a connection, with several alley-oop passes being thrown from Kidd to Martin. The Nets would finish the 2001-2002 season with a record of 52-30, good for the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. The Nets would also finish the season with the league's best defensive rating, and Jason Kidd would finish second in the NBA's MVP race, losing to the Spurs' Tim Duncan. However, many critics believe Kidd was robbed of the MVP award, as he was the floor leader of a Nets team that had doubled their win total from the season before and were considered favorites to come out of the East. Lakers center Shaquille O'Neal was one of the several critics who believed Kidd was deserving of the award, and was later quoted as saying, "Congratulations to Jason Kidd, the real MVP of the regular season."
First of all, I want to say congratulations to Jason Kidd, the real MVP of the regular season.
Lastly, Nets GM Rod Thorn was rewarded for his savvy moves and was named the 2002 NBA Executive of the Year. In the playoffs, the Nets were matched up with the 8th-seeded Indiana Pacers, led by future Hall of Famer Reggie Miller and emerging forward Jermaine O'Neal. The series was filled with theatrics, including Miller's half-court heave in Game 5 to send the game into overtime. The Nets would survive the double overtime Game 5 thriller, 120-109, and would move on to face Baron Davis and the Charlotte Hornets in the conference semifinals. Despite winning the season matchup 3-1, the Nets knew the Hornets would not roll over. After winning games 1 and 2 on their home court, the Nets were headed to Charlotte, where the Hornets stung back with a 115-97 rout of the top-seeded Nets. However, the Nets would regroup and take the next 2 games, ending the series in 5 in front of a raucous Meadowlands crowd. With the Hornets leading by 3 with only 5 minutes left to play, the Nets would flex their defensive muscles, finishing the game on a 17-6 run, capped off by a beautiful alley-oop pass from Kidd to Martin. The Nets were off to the Eastern Conference Finals for the first time in their franchise history. In the conference finals, the Nets were matched up with the Boston Celtics, led by Paul Pierce and Antoine Walker. After winning Game 1 at home, the Nets would go on to lose their next 2 games, which included a historical collapse in Game 3. The Nets would squander a 26-point lead and would fall behind 2-1 with Game 4 on the Celtics' home court. With the odds stacked against them, the Nets would come out firing in Game 4 and would once again take a commanding lead. However, for a second straight game, the Celtics would erase a large deficit, and the game would come down to the final seconds with Paul Pierce at the line and the Celtics down by only 2 points. With the Nets season on the line, Nets coach Byron Scott would call a timeout to freeze Paul Pierce, who would go on to miss both of his free throw attempts. The Nets would escape Boston with a 2-point win and a 2-2 series heading back to the Meadowlands. Back at home, the Nets would use a 20-1 fourth-quarter run to take a 3-2 series lead heading back to Boston, where they had their eyes set on closing out the pesky Celtics. In contrast to the first 2 games in Boston, Game 6 was close the majority of the way, and with the Nets holding on to a 3-point lead with under a minute to play, Kerry Kittles would drive baseline and find a wide-open Keith Van Horn for 3, which punched the Nets their ticket to their first ever NBA Finals appearance. However, the Nets' first NBA Finals appearance was memorable for all the wrong reasons. The Kobe and Shaq-led Lakers would disperse of the Nets in 4 straight games en route to their 3rd straight NBA title. While this Nets team fell short of the goal, the 2001-2002 Nets were instrumental in shaking the black cloud, which until that point had lingered over the franchise for their entire tenure in New Jersey. For the first time since the early 90s teams of Drazen Petrovic, Kenny Anderson, and Derek Coleman, the future was bright for the New Jersey Nets. Proud Nets fans could finally poke their chests out as they now had a competitive team to call their own. For the first time, the Nets were no longer the laughingstocks of the NBA. And that's going to wrap it up for this installment of A Trip Down Memory Lane. Thanks for watching, guys. Let me know if you enjoyed the video by clicking the like button and also subscribing to the channel. That would mean the absolute world to me. Also, let me know in the comments below any other memorable team seasons you would like to see me shine a light on in future videos. With that being said, the man from Jersey signing off. I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.